Well, good morning, everybody. I know I've talked about this idea before, but I thought it fits into our message a little bit this morning. So, have you ever seen a picture of yourself that everyone thinks, "Oh, this is such a great picture," but because you're smiling a little bit differently or a little bit weird, you think it's an awful picture? Like your determination of whether a picture is good or not is almost entirely dependent on how you look at it. Am I right? I've got a number of pictures here, which some of them I think are probably on purpose, but there's probably definitely some ones in there that were accidental, where one person, can I get my mic turned down just a tinge? I feel like I'm echoing a little bit. One person has ruined the entire picture, and they probably, everyone else could say, "This is a great picture, I love it," but the one person is really not going to like this picture. So let's take a look at the first one here. This looks like a grad photo or something like that, and I'm guessing she's doing that on purpose, just ruin it. Like our kids like to do that, photobomb the picture or something like that. But I think it'd be safe to say that's not her favorite picture. Next one. This girl here, I don't know what she's planning for the rest of the night, but it is not good. It is definitely evil. Next one. Sometimes it takes you a minute, right? You're like, wait, who is it? Where? It's this guy right here. I don't know what he's doing there, but I'm guessing that room's about to clear out in a hurry. Next picture. I almost hope that this is on purpose, like if that's his like picture spoiling face, because that's really funny. My guess is mid-sneeze or cough or worse. Next one. I just love that look on her. And I think it's the next one here. If you're squeamish, I apologize. This girl here is just gonna. I don't know who's more upset, her or these two on the outside there. But we'll move on from that picture so you don't have to look at it anymore. The number one pronoun. So if you're using a word to describe someone or someone like that, the number one pronoun in the English language most used is I. All right. When you are referring to a person, it is always about yourself. It's always about me. We put the focus and emphasis on ourselves. As much as we may want to be altruistic, as much as we may want to put the focus on other people, we naturally have this tendency to put the focus on ourselves. We tend to think that we need to be the ones in charge, and even if you're willing to let someone else be in charge, you might think that you know better. Maybe your commanding officer tells you something, and in the back of your mind saying, "I'm going to do it, but you're wrong because I know better." We want to fight. We want to get revenge. We want to get vengeance, even though God says vengeance is mine. We don't really want to hear that from God. We want when something goes wrong, we want to be the ones in control of who gets what. We want to make judgment calls. Problem is that when we follow our shepherd, when we follow the good shepherd, we have to change the focus from me to he. That's a bit hard to make out, but when we follow our good shepherd, we have to change the focus from me to he. Him is the proper thing, but me to he rhymes better. When we follow our shepherd, we have to change the focus from me to he. Today we're almost done. We've got a couple more weeks left of a series called He Leads Me. We are looking at Psalm 23, and we're looking at this passage that David penned in one of the most well-known books or chapters of the Bible, Psalm 23. But we're also using it to be a jumping point to look at other shepherds in the Bible. So we've looked at people like Abraham. We looked at I'm drawing a blank on his name. Adam. What's that? Abel. Thank you. Is that what you said? Yeah. Abel. I just drew a blank on that. So just different shepherds throughout Scripture. Today we're focusing on the shepherd who actually wrote the psalm. We're looking at the life of David. But we're focusing on verse 5 of Psalm 23 this morning. Psalm 23 says, "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me." Verse 5 says, "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows." It's an interesting verse. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Once again, when we follow our shepherd, we have to change the focus from me to he. The thing is, when you talk about preparing a table before me in the presence of my enemies. The only way that makes sense is if you shift your focus from me to he. Anointing my head with oil, the only way that makes sense for us in this day and age is if we shift our focus from me to he. And my cup overflows. It is so important for us to shift the focus from ourselves to God when it comes to that. We need to know this morning that God is in control. The shepherd is sovereign. If we're following our shepherd, we have to know that he is all-powerful, he is all-knowing, and all we have comes from him. So let's dive in a little bit to this passage. You prepare a table for me in the presence of my enemies. I mean, it sounds like an odd thing, doesn't it? I don't remember if I've told many of you this story before. When I was in high school, I played football, and I played on the football team. And my last year of high school, I actually switched teams. I switched schools, and so I played for the opposing team, the enemy team. And I fell in right away with the guys, and we became friends. But they had this initiation thing. So if you wanted to become a part of the football team, you had to go through the initiation. And for us this year, it was that we had to eat the hottest hot wings you could imagine. And so we went to a restaurant where one of the assistant coaches was actually doubled as a chef. And so I don't know what he did to these hot wings, but they were the hottest hot wings I've ever had. As soon as you put them to your lips, it's just like your mouth was on fire. But this was the initiation. It was kind of a fun thing, but it's like it wasn't like if you didn't do it, you wouldn't be on the team. But if you didn't do it, you would lose face, right? You wouldn't be as tough as some of the other guys. And so I start eating these hot wings, and I'm drinking a Coke as I go and stuff like that. About halfway through my wings, they take away my Coke from me. They said, you got to do the rest without anything else to drink. And so, I'm eating these hot wings, and by the time I'm done, I couldn't even feel my mouth. So just trying to be as tough as possible, I'm like, give me the extra hot sauce. And I start guzzling the hot sauce, just trying to make a name for myself. And then, my mouth's on fire, so I say, okay, give me my drink back. And they give me my drink, and I start to guzzle it without realizing that they had filled the rest of it with vinegar. So it was half Coke, half vinegar, and I got about halfway down, and I'm like, that's just not right. The thing is, these are my friends. All right? You can get pranked all the time by your friends. What would it be like to have a meal surrounded by your enemies? Now, imagine you are deployed, and you sit down to a meal, and you see surrounding you ISIS. How comfortable are you going to feel? Are you going to chow down at that meal? Are you going to be like, yeah, pass me the hot wings, no problem? Or are you going to be like one hand on your gun and the other hand, I'm not even touching that meal because I don't trust what's been put in front of me. So how is this good news? You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. How could that be good news for us? Well, again, we have to when we follow our shepherd, we have to shift the focus from me to he. He has prepared a table for me in the presence of my enemies. All right? He has prepared a table. The enemies haven't prepared the table. He has prepared the table. He's the good shepherd. He won't do anything to harm you. The only way you eat in the presence of your enemies is that the victory is already secured. Right? The only way you eat in the presence of your enemies is if you are there as a victor and the enemies are sitting around, in handcuffs or something. If our shepherd is preparing the table, it means that he already has the victory secured. Psalm 18 verses 1-3 says, I love you, Lord. You are my strength. Again, this is written by David. The Lord is my rock, my fortress, my Savior. My God is my rock in whom I find protection. He is my shield, the power that saves me in the place of safety. I called on the Lord who is worthy of praise, and he saved me from my enemies. When we follow our shepherd, we change the focus from ourselves and we put it on him. And if it says that you prepare a table for me, then we know it's going to be safe. If you and I prepare a table, it's only going to be as safe as we can make it. But if the good shepherd prepares a table for us, it doesn't matter who else is around. It doesn't matter if it's in front of our enemies or our friends or a football team. It doesn't matter who is around us. We know it's going to be safe because the good shepherd looks after us. Next part, it says you anoint my head with oil. If you were to Google shampoo for ... the number one thing that comes up is oily hair. All right, people do not want oily hair. Shampoo for oily hair is above shampoo for hair loss. All right, understand what that means? That people would rather have no hair than oily hair. Most people think that oily hair is worse than no hair at all. So how is the idea of you anoint my head with oil? How is that a good thing? How is that good news for us? Well, there's some history here, all right? It doesn't make as much sense for us today, but back in the day when David wrote this, it made all kinds of sense, especially for David. So in order to understand this, really, you need to get a little bit of the backstory. So if you go into the book of 1 Samuel, actually, yeah, if you may even want to start before that in the book of Judges. All throughout Israel's history in the Promised Land, starting in the book of Judges, we see Israel had no real leader. Every once in a while, God would raise up a judge, and the judge would save Israel, and then the people would do what they wanted again, and then they'd fall into trouble, and then God would raise up another judge. Well, the last judge is a man named Samuel. He was known as a prophet of God, and we really get his story in the book of 1 Samuel. And a time comes when all of Israel decides that we do not want to be led by Samuel anymore. We don't want to be led by judges. We don't want to be led by prophets or priests. And God even says to him, it's not you that rejecting, it's me that rejecting. Because Israel is saying, we don't even really want to be led by God. We want to be like everybody else around us. We want to have a king. We want to have a king just like all the nations around us. And so Samuel gets upset about this. But God says, you know what, it's not you that rejecting, it's me rejecting. And he tells him, I want you to go and anoint. Let's go back a slide, because we're still talking about Saul. He goes, I want you to anoint Saul. I want you to choose Saul as your king. And so Saul comes into the scene. And what we see about Saul is that he is tall. He is good looking. He is muscular. He's everything that you would look for in a leading male actor, right? And he comes on the scene. He's a head taller than everybody else, it says. That's one of the things that they talk about. He comes from a good family. And the people choose Saul as their king. And I mean, God tells Samuel to anoint him. The problem is, Saul, for the most part, is all show. I mean, he looks real good, but he doesn't really have the heart that chases after God that God would want. And so, after a reasonably short time, God rejects Saul. And Samuel is upset about this, and he's mourning for him. And we come to chapter 16, and God says, it's time for you to stop mourning for Saul. I've decided that I want you to anoint somebody else to be the king. Not right away, but the future king. And so he tells him to go and see to the town of Bethlehem and meet with Jesse and his sons. And so we pick up the story here in verse 4. So Samuel did as the Lord instructed. When he arrived at Bethlehem, the elders of the town came trembling to meet him. Why are they trembling? Because this is like the guy who speaks for God, right? We see the same kind of thing in the book of Exodus, and when they go up to the mountain, and the people of Israel don't want to have that one-on-one connection with God. They say to Moses, "You be our spokesperson." Well, they're afraid of Samuel because he speaks for God, but he also speaks for the king. And there's some, I don't want to go too much into history, but there's a little bit of animosity there. And so they come trembling to meet him and said, "What's wrong? Do you come in peace?" "Yes," Samuel replied, "I've come to sacrifice to the Lord. Purify yourselves and come with me to the sacrifice." Then Samuel performed the purification rite for Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice too. Now this might have been unusual, but no one really knew for sure what was going on here. And so they said, well, I guess if Samuel wants Jesse and his sons to come, he's got a good reason for it. And when they arrived, Samuel took one look at Eliab, that's the oldest brother, and he thought, surely this is the Lord's anointed. Now Eliab is just like Saul. He's tall, he's good looking, he's everything you'd look for in a leading male in Hollywood. If you're casting a movie, Eliab is the guy. And Samuel, the only king he's ever known, is Saul. And so he thinks prototype Saul is what a king is. He sees Eliab and he equates it to it. He says, this must be the one. Surely this is the one. Surely this is the Lord's anointed. Verse 7. And this is so important for us to understand. It says, but the Lord said to Samuel, don't judge by his appearance or height. Remember, Saul was tall as well. Don't judge by his appearance or height, for I have rejected him. The Lord doesn't see things the way you see them. People judge by outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. I so you think about your life. It's the same thing with us, right? I mean, we see people and we they make an impression on us, our first impression. You know, if you fall in love with somebody, when people say, I fell in love at first sight, it's very rarely because they thought they had a nice personality, okay? When you see someone across the room, you want to get to know them, it's because there's some kind of attraction going on there. Now, that's certainly not the way you want to base a relationship on, but we do have that tendency to judge things based on appearance, you know, until we actually get to know somebody. The thing is, God doesn't look at it that way. God doesn't look at the outward appearance, because that's something that we can fool people with our outward appearance. We can do that in the church. You know, we can look a certain way, we can act a certain way, we can do things and seem like everything's great, but God knows what's going on inside a person's heart. So then Jesse told his son Abinadab to step forward and walk in front of Samuel. Imagine what this is like for these brothers, you know. Abinadab sitting there waiting, thinking probably, you know what, Eliab's going to get chosen. He's the guy. He's the one that everyone likes. And as soon as he doesn't chosen, he's, oh, maybe it's me. Maybe it's my turn. He goes forward, but Samuel said, this is not the one the Lord has chosen. Next, Jesse summoned Shimea, but Samuel said, neither is this the one the Lord has chosen. And one by one, they all step forward, and each one is rejected. In the same way, or at least they're not chosen, is maybe a better way to say it. In the same way, all 7 of Jesse's sons were presented to Samuel, but Samuel said to Jesse, the Lord has not chosen any of these. So what's going on here? I mean, all 7. You love the way this is written, if you actually know the story. All 7 of Jesse's sons were presented to Samuel. So what's going on? Was Samuel, did he misread God? Was God wrong here? Then Samuel said, are these all the sons you have? This is the amazing thing. Jesse says, well, they're still the youngest, but he's out in the fields watching the sheep and the goats. Understand this. The man that God was going to choose to be king, who's going to be the prototype king for the rest of Israel. I mean, when Jesus comes, they don't call him the son of Abraham. Well, they do, but mainly they say he's the son of David, right? They recognize him as being, this is David's son. Like, David is the guy who all of Israel looks back to and says, he was our number one guy. He didn't even rank highly enough in his family to be invited to this meal, to be considered. And I don't know who needs to hear this right now, but if you are feeling neglected or rejected, understand God looks at things differently. All right? God looks at what's going on in your heart, and he can choose you for amazing things, even if you are just the one who's out watching the sheep and the goats. Still the youngest. Send for him at once, Samuel said. We will not sit down to eat until he arrives. You can almost imagine that Samuel's upset at this point. You know, I told you to bring all your sons in, and you left one out, and he's obviously the one who God has chosen. So Jesse sent for him. He was dark and handsome with beautiful eyes, but none of that is important, because what God looks at is the heart. And so we know that David had a heart after it says David was a man after God's own heart later in Scripture, but we know that it's true because the Lord said, this is the one, anoint him. So God has just said, I don't look at the outward appearance, I look at what's inside the heart. And now he's looking at David and he's saying, this is the one, anoint him. He's got the heart that I want to lead our country. So as David stood there among his brothers, Samuel took the flask of olive oil he had brought and anointed David with the oil. And again, if you look up the number one shampoo it's oily hair. Nobody wants oily hair, but maybe in that culture it was totally different. Anointing someone with oil was always a sign that you've been chosen for something specific, some special task. You know, when Aaron was chosen to be the priest, they anointed his head with oil. And you get the sense that it's not like we do here, where we take a little bit of oil, we put it on your forehead. I mean, they take a whole flask and they're just dumping it out. Like imagine a whole bottle of canola oil and you're just pouring it on your head, right? Like that's the impression you should get. And so David is writing this psalm, Psalm 23, and he's saying, you anoint my head with oil. And there's whole other parts of this too that go into like shepherds looking after sheep and anointing them to protect them from bugs and stuff like that. I didn't want to get into all that. I just wanted to look at David's story. And as he's writing this, he probably remembers this moment where God, through Samuel, anointed him with oil and chose him. The guy who didn't rate among his family, the guy who didn't matter to anybody, matters to God. And so David is writing the psalm and he's saying, you prepare a table for me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. You chose me to be who you want me to be. So he's anointed David with oil, and the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David for that day on. And then Samuel returned to Ramah. If the focus is on us, we will always look at the outward appearance. We will always look at the way people act, the things that they do when everyone's looking. We'll choose the Sauls of the world. I mean, don't you wish that people could understand this when they go to the polling station? I don't want to get political here, and I don't really have to name names or anything like that. Just, wouldn't it be so much better if people didn't look at the outward appearance when they chose a leader, but they looked at the person's heart and said, what is this person really about? Don't go after the good-looking, taller than everybody else, more powerful than everybody else, someone who comes from a good family. None of that matters to God. What matters to God is a person's heart. So when we follow our shepherd, we have to change the focus from me to he. We have to take the focus off of us and what we think and focus on what God thinks. God is the only one that can look at the heart. Everyone else can be fooled. We have to trust what God says. And the last part here, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Now, there was a season of our life when it was a regular occurrence. Some of you are in that stage right now, to have your cups at dinner knocked over, right? I mean, it was just all the time, milk dripping through the cracks of the table like some kind of waterfall thing going on. Thankfully, it doesn't happen as much anymore. But this past week, one of our kids was pouring Coke, Diet Coke into a cup, and just glug, 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 glug. And I'm sitting there walking around the table, and I'm watching it go up. And I've been around long enough to know what's about to happen. All right, there's a point of no return when you're pouring it, where the foam is just going to continue to go up. And even though you stop, there's some kind of chemical reaction that says, no, I'm not done yet, right? And so I know what's about to happen, and I had so many thoughts going through my mind. I wanted to say to this child, you need to stop because that's going to overflow. You put your mouth over top, it's sucking the foam. I had all these things going on, but all that came out was, no, 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 no. And so we had a little bit of an overflow, and we cleaned it up, and it was fine. Interesting thing, though, at the end of the meal, everyone had finished the meal, but there was still just a little bit of Coke left, and we started pouring it out. And, the kids all put their cup forward because I want a bit more. And there was no overflow at this point. There was nobody sitting there going glug, glug, glug until it overflowed. I mean, it's being poured out by drops to make sure everyone gets equal amounts, right? Just a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit here. When David says, my cup overflows, it means that there's enough. It means there's more than enough. I mean, the beginning of the meal, you got a full bottle, and so you're pouring until it overflows. Get into the meal, you're just pouring out a little bit because there's not enough left in the bottle. But in God's kingdom, there is always enough. There's always enough. In fact, there's so much that it overflows. When we follow our shepherd, we have to change the focus from ourselves and put it on him. Our focus will always be on making, if we focus on ourselves, our focus is always going to be making sure that we have enough. It's going to be making sure that, make sure nobody else gets more than me. I don't want to be left out, but just put it out by a drop. Make sure we all have enough, or make sure I have enough. But in God's kingdom, there's always enough, so much so that our cups are overflowing. And cups overflowing talks to me about God giving us so much that we share it with others. All right, there's a negative connotation with this, so I'm hesitant to say it. But to me, I picture a bar scene, where it's a victory of some kind. Maybe your team has won the championship, and you've all got these giant beer steins or Coke steins, if that works better for you. And you're just sitting there, and you're all kind of cheering and doing this, and it's sloshing all over the place. You don't care because there's so much of it, right? You're happy, you're full of joy, you're thrilled, and you know what? I can fill it up again. That's the kind of thing we need to focus on when we're looking at God's kingdom. And it's not about making sure I've got enough. It's making sure that everyone else gets what they need. God gives you, not so you can hoard it, but so you can give it to others. I remember a guy talking to me a while ago, and he said, the church does not need to hear one more sermon. The church does not need to hear one more sermon. All we need to do is take everything we've already learned and start using it. Start doing what we've been taught. But in God's kingdom, the only time you should be comparing to others is to make sure that they have enough. Because there's always, always, always more than enough for us. So I'm going to wrap up with this. as we go from here today, I want us to put our faith in a God that is all-powerful. All right? He defeats your enemies. He prepares a table for you in the midst of your enemies because he's all-powerful. You know you can trust it. He's all-knowing. God looks at your heart. He knows what's really going on. Put your faith in that kind of God. Recognize that all we have comes from him, and he has more than enough, that it overflows, and we can give to others. So put your faith in a God, all-powerful, all-knowing. Recognize that all we have comes from him, and then shift your focus from ourselves and put it on him, and follow your good shepherd everywhere he leads you. I'm going to ask the prayer team to come up and lead us.